Did you know Higher Ed's premier tech conference, Ellucian Live, is almost here? Join industry leaders in New Orleans, March 26th through 29th. Discover insights and game-changing solutions to unlock possibility and drive student success. Register at elive.ellucian.com.
Epic.
3 higher ed authors, 100 plus college and university presidents, dozens of actionable insights for academic leaders. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, is now available on Amazon. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio here again, and I say this in my sleep every single night because I've said it over 550 times to you all, and thank you for listening. Of course, an extended thank you to those of you that bought our book, Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, that I wrote with Kate Colbert this past November. I think we put it on Thanksgiving 2022. We took the first 125 presidents that we interviewed and took all their insights and stuck it in that book. So you don't have to go back and listen to 125 episodes and know what's going on here in higher education. And of course, one of the funnest, I don't know if funnest is a word, but it's going to be a word here on the EdUp Experience. One of the most funnest, because I'm an academic, so I like to put words together and call them my own. The most funnest things I get to do here is put together first-time guest co-hosts and first-time guests together, because you just never know what's going to happen and the amazing magic that can come out of making these connections. And you only get that here on the EdUp Experience, where, and I will say this to you again, because you've heard it tell me a million, tell you. Let me try that again. Tell you 100 times, or at least 99 times, that you can come and co-host with me anytime you want. If you're listening to this podcast and you say, man, I'd really like to do a podcast someday, or maybe interview a president someday, and you don't think that you'll be noticed or that you're visible, come on this podcast. All you got to do is raise your hand and say, Joe, I'd really love to co-host an episode with you, and I will put you on this podcast and make you part of the conversation. So you're not sitting back and just listening. You're helping to create the narrative in and around higher education. And I've got people that are going to help me do that here again. That's my monologue, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I only screwed up 3 times during it, which is actually pretty good average. I'd like to introduce my co-host. Here he is. He's Mark Salisbury. He is data nerd and founder of Tuition Fit. Mark, what's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me. This is a treat to be here. I cannot tell you how long I have waited with bated breath. I've lost sleep. I've lost weight, planning, hoping, dreaming, pining to be your co-host.
Yeah, well, I'm so sorry, because it was continually time after time that you asked me.
Access denied, access denied, access denied.
And finally you got through.
You know what? I recognize that voice. Is that, is that Kate?
I think it's ChatGPT.
Access denied.
Actually.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I sent you some Bitcoin and suddenly everything changed. You were so welcoming.
I got that Bitcoin in my back pocket. Is that possible? Well, I appreciate you, Mark. You know, I'm a big fan of Tuition Fit and the work that you're doing. We've been following each other for, I don't know, 2-3 years now. And so it's great to have you on the mic. I have a feeling it won't be the last time we have you here, because it sounds like you're already having a good time giving me a hard time. Hopefully we don't give our guest a hard time.
Well, no, this is a beautiful change, right? We all talk about even playing fields and balancing things out. And we now have a guest and myself, first time, right? And you're now the long-term, stodgy podcaster. So we have sort of shifted the balance of power here. We're the teaming up, ganging up on you. So you just need to be ready, because I happen to have with me someone here who's got Brooklyn in her bones. And you don't mess with that. You do not mess with that.
Okay, here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, here she is. She is Dr. Ann Prisco. She is president of Holy Family University. Ann, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. It's a delight to be here. I wasn't expecting Mark, so we'll see how we can do together. And we'll try not to beat up too much on you, Joe.
All right. Well, you know, it wouldn't be the first time, I promise you, that a guest and a co-host have beat up on me. It's happened many times before. But I brought you here. We wanted to have you on this podcast. There's just so much going on in higher education. Holy Family University. Let's just set the playing field for everybody and the listeners. Where is Holy Family University? What do you guys do, and how do you do it?
In 10 seconds or less, maybe.
You get a minute, in 1 minute.
Holy Family University was established in 1954 by the Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth, thus the name, to establish a university primarily in those times to prepare women to be nurses and teachers. Many of the faith-based schools started that way, and then they expanded based on the needs of the community. So, you know, the focus is always around the Catholic social justice teachings, which is, you know, diversity. We embrace diversity. We honor and respect the individual, and we welcome everyone to our campus, regardless of race, creed, color, religion. And I love the fact that we're about 3,600 students, so small classes, no auditoriums. We offer a full complement of, you know, associate, bachelor's, credit bearing, credentialing through masters, and we have 3 doctoral programs. I've been here for 18 months, and I love this community. We're an anchor institution in Philadelphia, Northeast Philly, and everyone keeps telling me, you have to say Northeast Philly, because it is a little different than Central Philly, and also in Bucks County. So community service, being part of the community and being an anchor institution is an important part of our role.
Just as a quick plug, and this is a personal thing, but if you ever go to Philadelphia, for anybody that's listening, and you head down to Center City in the Reading Terminal Market, there's a place down there called DeNick's where you get the greatest pork and broccoli rabe sandwich that you could ever have. And that's why I go to Philly, just for that sandwich. But I got a question for you, Ann.
Listen to my important question.
I just want to make sure that I'm properly set up to ask it. You're the first lay president, from what I understand. And there is somebody listening here that has absolutely no idea what that means. What does that mean? What does that mean to be the first lay president? And why is that significant to Holy Family University and higher education as a whole?
Being the first lay president, or non-nun or non-sister, you may be more familiar with those terms, means that up until now, the presidents of the university have been a sister from the Order of the Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth. So when we say I'm the first lay president, what that means is I'm the first non-religious to serve in the role. So, and this is quite a trend in higher education. There are about 210, I'll speak for Catholic universities in the country, and probably more than 50%, if not more than them right now have turned to lay leadership, because the religious organizations themselves, you know, new members are declining. People who are maybe interested and trained to do this work, which is, you know, you need a lot of experience to do this type of work. And so the fit of finding a religious who's interested in being a university president is getting far fewer. So those of us who believe in the mission and values of these institutions are sort of picking us up and promising that we're going to continue the mission and values of the school.
That's amazing. And the last question that I have for you in this line would be: do you think that that Catholic schools might be turning to a lay president because the job itself of a university president has evolved? There's more financial acumen. There's more, I don't know, fundraising is becoming a priority. Not that they weren't a priority before, but as the balance of power, so to speak, shifted from academics and deep academic, quality, not that still doesn't exist, to higher ed might be a business and you need to make revenues and have expenses, and maybe we needed another way to look at this. Is that part of what has this trend moving?
I definitely think that's a trend we've seen in higher ed, right? I mean, regardless of whether it's a religious institution or not. I've spoken to this because I'm a very when I was first hired to be a president back in 2012 at Felician, which was then a college in New Jersey, I was the first lay president there. But what made me really unusual was the fact that up until that time, it's like we said, it was the traditional, someone was an academic, then they were a dean, then they were the provost, and they became the president. So when you looked at job requirements back then, it was, have you held academic rank? How many books have you published? How many, research projects have you gotten money for? It was much more focused on an academic. And now if you look at what the job qualifications are, Mark, I see you're nodding, right? They're just different. They are looking for people. I have an MBA in finance and a PhD in economics. I mean, I've taught too, so I love both sides, as we say, administration and academics. But in the case of the religious, it really is much more about just the shrinking population of the religious orders themselves and the likelihood that they would find someone with the skill set and the will to do this type of work. So it's both.
That's amazing. And Mark, we emailed each other back and forth and you said, Joe, how am I going to know it's my turn to jump in? And so I downloaded this sound just for you.
Now it's your turn.
So I was hoping that would be clear.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. Maybe you could just play it again to sort of make sure I'm aware.
Now it's your turn.
Just want to make sure you heard it.
All right, Joe, mute yourself because I'm taking over because I got some questions. All right. Okay. One of the things that you just talked about that I think is a really interesting sort of avenue to explore here is, folks criticize higher education for the inability to change, right? And there's sort of an interesting inverse relationship between the longer a school's been around, the more tied it is to a historical sort of footprint and traditions and the way they do things, right? And in some ways, schools that are newer don't have that, and maybe that sets up the opportunity to do things differently. As the first lay president at a place that, one could see the scenario where, it's really important to sort of lean toward the history because you don't want to be too different than what's been there before. But at the same time, maybe it gives you some space to say, there's no secret here. I'm different. I'm new. I can make some things change and help an institution evolve and grow in the context of taking over during a pandemic and all of the other things that higher ed's been through in the last decade. Do you see that being the first as an opportunity in a sort of new way that gives you some freedoms that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise?
I can speak specifically to the two situations I've been in, and it had much more to do with where the institutions are than the fact that I was the first lay president. Right. So when I walked into Felician, it was clear that they were in trouble and I needed to do a turnaround. So lots of transformational change over I was there 8 years. So that was, I would say, much more of why I needed to do that than the fact that I was lay or not. In the case of Holy Family, I've been here for 18 months. And again, I think there's two strands to this. One is that when you're a faith-based institution and the community has been used to the religious leader who represents the founding order, and you're the first person who isn't, there is a sense of obligation, and we've talked about this as lay presidents, to be sure we're clear about carrying on the mission and the values of the organization. If anything, I think, to your point, we almost go out of our way because we don't have the habit on or the collar on that just kind of says, we must be following our mission and values because look who's the leader. So to a certain extent, the pressure is on us to make sure we emphasize that's important to us, and that's why we're here. Once that's stated, I don't know if it gives us less or more latitude. I really think it depends on what's going on at that particular school.
That's interesting. It's interesting that are there pressures, are there communal pressures on you where, do your decisions get questioned? It's one thing because I think presidential decisions get questioned all the time anyway. But
Important job.
is there an extra bit where it's like, hey, you know what? Is this in line with the mission? Is it always those decisions
Oh, of
always
course.
set within the mission 100% of the time without?
And it's something we always have to be cognizant of, right? And also keeping in mind, the religious order ultimately has final control of the institution. I mean, they don't quote unquote support us financially, but they have governance. They have a governance over the entire institution. So, so ensuring that when we do things, it's synonymous, or it's not outside of the mission and values that we hold, or if it is, why we would have to explain why we were still going to do it.
There's a
Mark,
lot
keep
of
going.
talk in higher ed about mission creep at different institutions. And it seems like one of the things that you're hinting at is that having that historical set of values sort of established and clearly put forward helps as a mechanism to sort of balance against the potential for mission creep. Is that something that you think plays out?
Yeah, and the mission creep thing, I mean, at a university like Holy Family, that's always been so adaptable and nimble to change, right? We're here to address the needs of the communities we serve. The majority of our students are commuters. So mission creep many times refers to sort of the programming or the court, right? The academic programs you're offering. And I don't think in this case that's necessarily true.
I want to touch on your website just a little bit as we shift this conversation, because I like the messaging on the website, and I'm big in looking at marketing value proposition. Two things I would like to ask you about. There is a lot of family messaging, and I don't think it's any pun intended here, but literally family.
There is, yeah.
Yeah, you're part of the family, but you talked about small, you talked about accessible, that family atmosphere doesn't exist when you get past a certain 1,000 of students. I don't know what that number is, but it's, when you talk to bigger universities, that's the struggle, is engagement and belonging and so on. And so you're talking about that. But let me ask you about that one first, why that's such a central message towards what you're after.
The idea of family.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So clearly it's part of, the state, what the sisters were devoted to. So it's interesting, right? Because as sisters, they themselves don't start their own families, and their commitment is to support other families. I'm always very careful because in many ways we are chosen family. We're not family that has to, we're not brothers and sisters by blood. So it's a choice to be part of this family. And it reflects the Catholic social teaching, which is today so more important than ever, which is we're all in this together, and we're supposed to respect each other and support each other and welcome diversity, because that's how we learn from each other. So when we talk about family, those are the next things we say, right? That this is a family we're chosen to be part of, and many of us don't look anything like, come from different backgrounds, but that's what this is about. We're here to learn from each other.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention? It's time for us to solve the puzzle of success in higher education. Get your ticket to Ellucian Live for industry insights, powerful connections, and innovative solutions. From March 26th through 29th, join peers from around the world in New Orleans to unlock the possibility and drive student and institutional success. Learn more and register at elive.ellucian.com. You know that the world of higher education is experiencing evolutions and revolutions. You want to be part of the progress. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education with insights from more than 100 college and university presidents, will show you how. Get your copy of Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education now on Amazon right away. We think you're going to love it. It's
amazing.
That's important, right, in this day and age, and we've talked about this before with the way our political environment is, but the way we're not able to have conversations where it doesn't end up in some kind of escalation, and there's this education of the whole person, could be looked at as liberal arts education or packaged differently. And there is a lot of criticism around the liberal arts education or the education of the person, that it's not skills-based enough, and that employers aren't going to hire these people who have these, whole person educations. They want the person that can just do this one job. And you go, well, what happens if they can't do that one job, or they need to do two jobs? What's your take on this whole liberal arts slash maybe not non-skills based, but a education that includes skills based education but isn't central to it, and why that has value in higher education today?
Sure. And this is an important topic to me. So one of the things I think we have trouble with as a society is we throw terms around that the average person doesn't really know. What is liberal studies? What is liberal arts studies? Like, we say that like people are supposed to understand. If you're a first generation kid, your mom and dad don't know what this means. You don't know what it means. So I think it's really important to talk about what is that. And we actually know that employers are saying that's the kind of skills they want in people. They want people who can critically think, who can learn something new. And those are the things, and have empathy and compassion and have ethical thinking. So those are the things we lay the groundwork for in the liberal arts, or we could call it the general education curriculum, right? So institutions like Holy Family and many of the ones I've served in the past, we are not when I say traditional liberal arts school, meaning many schools will be devoted to liberal arts. They'll graduate historians, philosophers, who then many times go on to do something and, use their career in some useful way based on their education. Schools like Holy Family, it's always been a mix. We do general core, right? But most of our students want a skill. They want to graduate knowing they're graduating into a profession.
Nailed it.
Right? Especially first gen. I was a first gen kid. I always joke. One of my sons was an English, he's a writer. He was an English major in college. The other one was a sociology major. I never could imagine going home to my immigrant father, who was a construction worker, to say, I'm going to go to college to think big thoughts or read good books.
Yikes.
Right? It wasn't in that's not the way we think about education. So the ability to do both, to lay that foundation, lay the groundwork. I got to take philosophy. I got to take some liberal arts and introduced in literature, but I knew ultimately I needed a major that was going to lead to a degree, and we do both. And the crazy thing is, I really think business is driving this conversation about the skill sets, because it doesn't align, right? We know that the average person who gets a college degree in their lifetime will make $1 million more, have more choices, be healthier, have less unemployment, right? They're just going to have a better quality of life. At the same time, where we keep saying you don't need a college degree. And I'll always say everyone's not meant to go to college at 18, but you know what? Life is long. We have lifelong learning in this country, right? People in other countries think we're nuts. I got my PhD when I was 43 years old. I finished. I already had 2 children, but I could do that. My family in Italy thought I was out of my mind. What do you mean you're changing jobs again? What do you mean you're going for yet another degree? Like, why? So, but because that's what we can do, and life is long, and why not keep learning and studying? So maybe at 18, you need to learn how to be a welder. But you don't want to be on the bottom of a boat when you're 55 and 60 welding. Maybe you want to manage or be the accountant or do something in a company that hires welders. So keep going to school, get extra credentials, keep learning so that you fine tune along the way. Don't think of it as like, if you don't do it by the time you're 22, you're done.
Amazing.
That's what I love about this country, that we could do these things, right?
I love the way you described this, and I was lucky enough to get a chance to hear you talk about your longer story, which if anybody's got a little bit extra time on their hands, to go and Google it and find some great interviews with you where you sort of tell your longer story of from growing up in Brooklyn and to where you are now. And that clearly shapes the way you think about all of this stuff. And it sounds like you're sort of pointing to a couple of either ors that get thrown around in higher ed that never have been either ors, right? And that there's this odd translation problem where liberal arts outcomes are the exact kind of skills that employers want, right?
Mhm.
How do you like to think about, and how do you like to sort of talk about how we can bridge those translation problems, or those sort of wrong assumptions that folks make about, you do a liberal arts degree, therefore you have no ability to manage people somehow, right?
Right. So what I'm usually trying to do is translate into some sort of way that families will, without it's not that you're dumbing down to them or anything, but again, we talk about small class sizes. What does that mean to the average person, right? You're going to have a choice in your liberal arts core. What is that? So what I'm always trying, and I do the same thing when I teach economics, right? I said, I could sound like the textbook, or I could speak to you in English, so you'll understand what the textbook is saying, right? So I think we always have to catch ourselves. I like to even show sometimes when I'm going to speak, like someone who's not in our world at all, and say, read this. Does it make any sense to you? Like, do you know what I'm talking about, and the terminology I'm using? So I do think the onus is on us always to think about, who's our audience, and where do we have to meet them so that they can understand what the message we're trying to get through to them.
Fun fact for you guys, if you didn't know this, as somebody who spent 15 years in the dreaded for-profit education sector, for many of the faculty who like to look down at us, you for a while you couldn't say small class sizes. You couldn't actually put that in any of your advertising because it could be potentially misleading. And a student might think that's 5, or another student might think that's 50. And so you had to be specific, or you couldn't actually say it. And I think that's just a really good example of higher education as a whole. And to your point, what do these things mean? And things are very hard to navigate. And that has to do with, it goes back to the FAFSA even, and the financial aid process. And I want to go back to your website, because what I liked about your website is you do have a call out specifically to financial aid on the homepage. A lot of schools won't do that. They'll have it within a drop down. It's under this other category. You've got it kind of splashed right below the fold, a section down, financial aid. Obviously is important to your students. Why is that brought to the forefront on the homepage, where you're going to have a student engage with that content? Why you want that front and center?
Yeah, thank you, Joe, because it's exactly for that reason, right? Let's face it, we work really hard to keep tuition reasonable. We're actually the lowest sticker price private institution in the state. So we work really hard because, again, I always joke with the sisters, like I said, okay, we're going to provide an excellent education, but we have to charge the minimum amount we possibly can, because we want all students to be able to come here. It's like, all right, and how do we do that? Right? How do you do all the things you need to do well?
That's the red pill and the blue pill question.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So, I'm sorry, I'm losing my train.
Financial aid.
Yeah, so financial aid. This is my, I started out in financial aid. I went to college on financial aid. I know what it's like to fill out those forms. As a first-gen student, I filled out the forms and my parents signed them. They had no idea how to fill out those forms. So again,
What the heck is going on?
I think we forget, how do we help them? And so putting it out in the front just says, look, we know this is something you're going to have to think about. Here it is. Why are we going to bury it?
This was a whole transition question.
Yes, you sort of laid out the table, the red carpet for me here. At Tuition Fit, the project is all about making college prices transparent, so that the public can find the schools that fit their price range. And you mentioned the sticker price being lower than all the other schools in Pennsylvania, which is great. And it's a sticker price that's lower than lots of private institutions all over the country, right? But most students get lots of financial aid, right, from various sources. Right. And how do you try to help people understand that the sticker price isn't the price they're going to pay, and continue through the process of applying, visiting campus, really exploring an institution and trying to see themselves there, when they're still wondering, okay, yeah, you told me that it wasn't going to be 48,000, but is it going to be 38,000 or 18,000? Because that makes a big difference for me.
Yeah, sure. So, and I mean, we're all very familiar with these discussions, right? I was chair of the student aid committee for NICU. I mean, this is something we've lived with for a long time. So what I think is the most important thing is we try and use plain language and give it and make information accessible and always be there to answer the questions, because many times the students don't even know what the questions are, right? So we're doing lots of information sessions, lots of open houses, on campus events. And to be honest, as one of the things that we are good at as a smaller institution is getting back to people and being available and doing those 15-20-minute half-hour financial aid counseling calls where they really go through the details with the student, help them fill out the application if they need it, explain all the different programs, even to the extent that we squeeze them on how much of a loan are they going to borrow, right? So at most schools, you apply for what you apply for, you process the application, it goes through, right? And if you're eligible, we can't tell you you can't borrow that much money as a school. But if a counselor is sitting with you and says, do you really need all 5? Can you get away with 3? You really only need 3 to fill your open balance. What do you need that extra? Then all of a sudden, our students are borrowing $10,000 less than the average over the course of 4 years because we're having those types of exchanges with them. So that constant education, and as you said, and it's all out there for them so that we try and explain it up front. We still all struggle with that Shivers effect, right? We've talked about this for years. Should we all just, stop using scholarships and financial aid and just reduce the price? But we know that has other unintended consequences because there is a variety of families. There are a variety of families that have different abilities to pay. And that's always our discussion around why have a free system of higher education when isn't it much more equitable to give the help to the people who really need it?
Yeah, one note, I want to add one thing because this is an important one, Mark, before you go and ask your next question. But that is something that doesn't come up a lot of time when we talk about debt and students and tuition, is that the student generally qualifies for more aid than they need to pay for the tuition and the education, because built into the cost of attendance is generally living expenses. And the student comes down to a decision point, which could be thousands of dollars, and they're asked, do you want to take this money as a part of your education? And the schools can say, we don't want to give you this money, but we have to tell you what you're eligible for, and you get to make the choice on whether you want it or not. We can counsel them, you can put it through counseling, but in the end, the student gets to take the aid that they want if they're eligible for it. That creates debt over years, and that's hard to pay, and it wasn't related to the actual cost of the institution. And so a lot of that is on student borrowing habits too that affects institutions. Anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up because that's just like a little lesser known fact about the student debt crisis as it exists.
Yeah, thank you, because I do think it's important. People have to, if the student's eligible, the school can't tell them, I'm not going to certify your application. We can't control how much money they borrow. It's up to the federal limits to do that.
But it, like you said, it becomes a sort of deliberate decision on the part of the institution that ties back to the values of that institution, right? And that's one of the things that has struck me about this conversation, and that you've hearkened back to several times, is the values of the institution as it relates to family and taking care of each other, then trickles down into a very small but really important piece of this, the conversation that a prospective student would have with a financial aid office about the possibility of borrowing money that they've already got in the kitty. It's already sitting there, they're qualified for, but that a counselor would actually take the time to say, do you actually need to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, and it shows. So I think the average now is up to 38 for an undergraduate, 38,000, and for our university is 28,000, and our default rate is half the national average. So again, that's a value, right? You have to pay this money back.
Yes.
You're bound by your responsibilities. That's one of our mottos, right? It's like, you know, you're going to borrow this money, you're going to pay it back, you're going to be a good citizen. And they do.
Yeah. Can I
know-
jump in, Joe, real
go ahead.
quick and just ask about one thing that you raised in your response a second ago, is this sort of tension between what's the sort of philosophical framework that shapes how you decide pricing, right? And that Chivas Regal effect is a long-standing premise, right, under the high price, high discount idea, which at the time when it sort of became a thing, it was not really a question. It wasn't really a question about whether the Chivas Regal affects different kinds of people in different ways, right? But now it's sort of clear that that effect plays out in the way that people anticipate for people who are more affluent, but it doesn't have the same effect for people who aren't affluent, who's, you know, just like, no, I can't, that's not going to work, that price. So in this space, there's been a growing conversation about tuition resets.
Mhm.
And as a president who's now your second institution, and the conversation I'm sure has come up at different times, can you talk a little bit about how you respond, or what questions come to your mind when you think about, should we consider tuition reset, and maybe not just at Holy Family, but at just institutions, private institutions writ large? What are the things that you juggle when you start thinking about that possibility?
Sure. Well, one is your competitive set, right? Where are you located? Which other schools do the students who apply to you think about? And so the competitive set. And also, we all know that private institutions also compete strongly with the publics, right? So that's always part of when I say competitive set, I'm not talking just privates, I'm talking publics as well.
Absolutely.
And then where do you situate yourself? Where do you see yourself in that mix of schools? And so how do you ensure that your messaging around what you're charging is accurate relative to the suite of schools that you're competing against, right? So, I mean, when you look at a place like, there are 14 universities in Philadelphia.
Mhm.
There are 92 nonprofit independent institutions in Pennsylvania, not counting the state schools and the community colleges. So this is a very heavily competitive state. So it's constantly, where do you sit in the spectrum of schools? You know, what's your value proposition relative to everyone else? So a big piece of what I talk about is, what's the average cost of education and what happens when you graduate from here? What's the likelihood? What's the average? Now we have all this data about average income after you graduate. So, you know, in my case, I've been able to demonstrate that the average cost of tuition is one of the lowest in the state, and yet you get the highest return to education based on your education after 5 years out. So we have data that shows that. So I think that's always part of the calculus, is sort of, where do you sit relative to everyone else? Where do you want to be, right? Because part of this is an impression of the value of the education you're receiving. When some schools cost $80,000 and others cost $40,000, somehow the inference is that $80,000 school somehow is better. Whether that better is the right better for you is a different story, right?
No, is it better versus, is it $40,000 a year better?
Right.
That becomes a very interesting, different conversation.
Yeah.
Or is
Yeah.
it the
Different
same
kinds of
just for
students.
$40,000 a year more?
Yeah. And I mean, that's the ranges when you think about
Yes.
it. That's the crazy range we're talking about. You know, some kids can go to a community college practically for no cost. And then you could go to most Ivy Leagues if you could swing $80,000 a year. And then there's everything in between.
Right.
There's so many phenomenons in that too, with pricing, and I want to close out so we don't take more of your time, but there is this, people like a sale phenomenon. Parents like to be able to discuss affluence of where their child went, and somehow this school down the road, although the quality of education is accredited by the same place and has the same learning outcomes, isn't as good as this one. And there's so many human biases that come into where and how pricing is set and how we align pricing with those biases. It's really an incredible phenomenon on where we've come over the years to get to this point. And then for those that do a tuition reset, does that somehow communicate lesser quality that I mean, there's these, it doesn't, but people might look at it that way. And so you have to really take the pros and cons of that approach. I've been through 2 actually tuition resets and a lot more tuition, upping the tuition, but 2 tuition resets. And there were fallouts on both sides of those coins. It's a really interesting thing. And I'm glad to know that you have that opinion. And Mark, you're leading the charge on transparency. Look at what we could put together here in the EdUp experience. What a conversation. We like to close out the episodes with the same 2 questions to every single guest. And number 1, what did we not say about Holy Family University today that needs to be said? Anything you can think of, anywhere you're speaking, any new programs, you want to love on your staff for a minute, anything you could think of, the mic is yours. And number 2, close us out with what you see as the future for higher education.
So the shout out, besides the fact that I have an incredible faculty and staff and we're doing great, which is not the scenario that we're hearing about most smaller institutions. So I'm happy to say we're doing well.
Amazing.
We're the safest campus in Philadelphia, and considering the concerns right now nationally, obviously around safety and gun violence, we're very proud to be able to say we're a safe community and we're a safe campus. What was the other thing?
The future of higher education, the easy one. What
Oh,
is
yeah.
the future of higher education?
Alive and well, and what an exciting time, because we've got so many different ways to learn and technology to learn and teach from. I think it's just really exciting, and it's just going to be what's the next morphing of higher education. It's not going away. It's going to be, I think it's going to be more exciting because everybody's going to see more opportunity and more options.
Oh, yeah.
Now that's the way you close out an episode, right there. I want to first thank my friend. He's Mark Salisbury. He's founder, mastermind, creator of Tuition Fit. Mark, give us a shout out of Tuition Fit. How do we find out more about your organization?
Tuitionfit.org, tuitionfit.org. I'm going to invent words just like you do. So Tuition Fit's just one word, throw them together, make one word. The whole idea is the public and now colleges and universities have started to join us, putting data all into one place, the actual prices that students are being asked to pay, to create a single Kelley Blue Book of college pricing that allows anybody to simply find which schools fit my price range. Then I'll go look at them. That's what Tuition Fit is.
What did you think of this EdUp experience business today, Mark, for your first time here?
You know, I'm jittery, but mostly it's coming down. I was expecting one of those sandwiches from the Reading Market to come get delivered out here in Davenport, Iowa. Didn't show. I don't know what to tell you. Didn't show. So I'm a little bit hungry, frankly.
Me
but
too.
I got to tell you, I really enjoyed hanging out with you, Joe. And the voices are great. But I also really enjoyed listening to you, Ann. It's so refreshing and wonderful to hear a college president talk about how their own life experience shaped the way they see what they do, how values really need to be lived out and can be lived out in a way that makes an institution thrive and succeed. And given all of the pressures that the whole ecosystem feels, to at the end of the day hear you say, this is a great place to be right now. And it's really exciting to see how this is going to grow and change in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Well, Mark,
it's education, right? I always say this, it's education. We're in the education world. How much luckier can we be?
I think I speak for Ann, Mark, when I say,
I like your style, dude.
And of course, my guest today, our guest, your guest, she's Dr. Ann Prisco. I heard her say she's Italian. So am I. She's the president of Holy Family University. So now we have a connection that will last forever. And what did you think about the EdUp experience and your time here today?
I totally love it. And I'm copying some of your ideas from my own podcast.
There is no better a form of flattery than that. You copy away, and you will have an open invitation to come and co-host with me, or email me and ask any questions you have. I would love to help you in any way that I can. I think your mission is great. I think what you're doing and the work that you're doing is your transparency is great. A lot of respect for you, and thank you for coming on the podcast today. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for some
Amazing.
news. It's time to work together to solve the puzzle of success in higher education. Ellucian Live returns to New Orleans from March 26th through 29th to help you unlock possibility for your institution. And yes, the EdUp experience will be there recording live. Industry leaders from all across the world are converging to discover new insights, game-changing solutions, and powerful connections, all with the goal of addressing higher ed's greatest opportunities and biggest challenges. You do not want to miss Ellucian Live. Learn more and secure your seat today at elive.ellucian.com. It will be
Amazing.
It's time to
Level up.
the beginning of a new era in higher education begins with you. Order your copy of Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education by Kate Colbert, Dr. Joseph Lucille, with contributions by Elvin Freitas. It's higher education's must-read book of 2022. Discover how you can seize the moment to change higher education forever. Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, now available on Amazon. For bulk orders, contact Kate, Joe, or Elvin.